My name is David.
And my name is Jason.
And this is Discern Realities, a Dungeon World podcast. Our first segment is What Happened Here Recently?
So, David, you and I recently finished up a short campaign that I was running called Legerdemain.
Yeah, we did. It's my return to the Ranger playbook. It's been a while for that, and it was a different place for a Ranger, being that it was a theater.
Yes, you were playing a Ranger in an entirely urban adventure, and not just urban, inside a single building. So let's talk about what it is. So Legerdemain, it was a adventure in my ongoing Songs of the Shadow Court campaign. It was inspired by something really specific. So when I was a kid, I was really into Dungeon and Dragon magazine, right? We've talked about that before. And one of my favorite modules from Dungeon magazine was this module called Legerdemain. My memory of it was it was a module that took place in an opera house. There were evil humanoids infiltrating this play. They disguised themselves as actors in the play, these orcs and goblins and halflings, right? They disguised themselves as actors in the play, and they were there to pull off like this sort of criminal activity for this wizard who was in the audience, kind of watching over everything, right? There's a big mechanical dragon on stage, and the whole thing just had sort of like a mystery vibe, a slightly funny, actually quite funny comedy kind of thing going on. And I just loved it. It was a setting that you didn't really see very much, right? Like in fantasy gaming, this idea of an adventure in an opera house. Really loved it as a kid. Turns out it's not that great.
So had you run it as a kid or played in it as a kid?
I had not, no. I mean, there were so many adventures that were in each issue of Dungeon magazine. There was like something like 6 or 7 or something, right? And there was just no way to play them all. So for me, it was more of a just, kind of inspiration, I guess, or it was just something that I just kind of read for pleasure, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, I was like, I'm going to do this. Since Songs of the Shadow Court takes place in an urban environment, it's an urban adventure, or an urban campaign, I should say, I'm going to do Legerdemain. Not that great. It was just not very good. I went back and it was just mostly a bunch of like combat encounters, with a sort of mystery kind of wrapped around it. And there were things I liked about it and things I didn't like about it. And I was hoping, so my eventual goal for this little series that we ran was to make it so we could capture some of the themes, right? I wanted to capture some of the themes. I wanted to capture some of the flavor. So, and I even used some of the NPCs from the module. And I think it was pretty successful in that regard.
Having not read it, but hearing your description of it, I can say there were many elements that you listed. There were funny instances. There was an opera house. There was a large mechanical dragon, and there were people infiltrating it, trying to do something for a wizard. But the wizard was not there, to my knowledge.
Yeah. In the original module, the wizard is like actually alive and there. In my version of Legerdemain, he was like in a spirit realm trying to be brought back, right? And the play was like a ritual to do this, to bring him back from this other world. I did include the murderous brother and sister halfling pair, who were probably 2 of the better characters from that module. I used lots of the NPCs and lots of the names and stuff and just kind of reconfigured them, recontextualized them. So we really got like the flavor of Legerdemain, but not the actual story of Legerdemain,
Yeah, and not the obligatory combat encounters.
Right, yeah. I did want to talk about a couple things, though. So there were not a lot of combat encounters. In fact, it ended up being more of like a mystery kind of situation because you were all there at the Opera House on a mission for the Shadow Court, and you began to uncover this sort of like deeper conspiracy going on, like with this nature cult, and then with this like ancient noble family, and of course the wizard himself, and all this other stuff. And suddenly there was all these different actors, not like opera actors, like these other characters who had an interest in the ritual play opera thing that was going on. And so it kind of became this like just like this like kind of set piece, this big set piece kind of mystery thing, right? And so one of the players was expecting more of a traditional dungeon crawl type thing. He'd never played Dungeon World with me, not a fan of this podcast as far as I know, and so was really expecting like a straight kind of dungeon crawl thing, like a little bit more like Dungeon World as written, you know? And so I feel a little bad because like this adventure was not that, you know, like it was very much like, sorry about your expectations, but we're doing this like kind of goofy sort of, like almost like the movie Clue kind of like mystery thing, right?
Right. Yeah. He seemed confused about like, you know, exactly what he was supposed to be doing there, I think.
Yeah. And I think his you know, his feedback that he gave was legit because to some degree he was playing a playbook that is, you know, kind of like problem solving oriented, you know, a playbook that would be very good in a dungeon, right? And it took a couple of sessions before we were able to find something for his character to do, you know? And indeed, his character ended up framing like the coolest plan, right? Like and his character's particular talents ended up being the thing that saved the day. And I was really happy we were able to kind of bring it to that point. But I was reminded that like, oh man, you know, not everybody automatically knows how you like to run a game, you know, of Dungeon World. And so sometimes it's best to kind of talk about how you think it's going to go. Everybody else I think was really into it, but it was just, yeah, there was a little bit of friction. The other thing I wanted to talk about was your character. So listeners, this is going to be an episode where we talk about how great a player David is for a lot of it. Okay. Not just this segment. I loved what you did with your character. He was a ranger called Shep. And let me tell you what I loved about it, David. At a certain point, I think it became kind of obvious to you that you weren't going to be the star of the story, right? The sort of bigger mystery, the sort of bigger campaign hooks involved some of the other characters and not really your character. And what you did, which I thought was really great, was instead of trying to shoehorn your Ranger Shep into that sort of central story, you instead kind of held back a little bit, or at least like stepped back a little bit, and you played more of a support character. And indeed, you focused on really good characterization and being funny, you know? And as a result, your character was super engaging and interesting, right? Even though they weren't really part of like the main through line.
Yeah, I was happy with Shep, and thank you for the compliment. I'm glad you liked what I was doing. Yeah, there was definitely a lot of like bigger overarching stories. Like we had like a character who is like romantically engaged with an NPC, and that was like really important because that NPC was up to some mischief, and it was a little bit unclear exactly what. So that was like where the kind of main story seemed to be happening. So I was just trying to like help solve the mystery of like what's going on around here, and there's these two halflings running around, and like we need to try and sort that out. And not so interested in like trying to deep dive into like what's Shep's backstory or anything like that. And since Shep is a ranger, that means he's got an animal companion, and I put a fair bit of work into making the animal companion interesting for other people to interact with beyond just me. So I'm glad that panned out.
Yeah, I thought it was really great. I mean, I think a less skilled player would not have picked up on that sort of direction that the story was going, and they would have flailed around a little bit or just not had fun, right? Like they would have just like backed off and been like, you know, like, oh, well, this doesn't include me. And I think it took a lot of skill and experience, or at least you demonstrated a lot of skill and experience in the way you sort of grabbed hold and made your fun, right? And I really admired that.
Thanks again. Like, I'm going to just like blush this entire episode.
Well, and actually it kind of ties back to what I was saying about the other player too, because that player started to have more fun when they did the same thing, right? They, like, I saw it. I was like, oh, like, he's really into it now. And the moment he became into it was when he basically said, fuck it, I'm taking control of this situation. I'm going to insert my character into maybe not like this sort of like bigger mythology story that's going on, but there are things going on in this theater, and I'm going to do something, I'm going to do what I'm good at. And so he found a way to like incorporate what his character is good at to kind of get his fun out of it, kind of like you did with your animal companion, right? Like you made that a central like feature of your character's play. And I love that, like it didn't take me to like, I didn't have to like put it in front of you guys, right? And say like, here's a thing for you to do, right? It was a very proactive approach to your character. And so, yeah, I think it really ended in a nice place because of that.
Awesome. Yeah, I agree. I think that everyone ended up having a good time by the end of that. Like the final sequence was really, really cool and had some cool callbacks and things like that.
Yeah. Just so listeners have it, understand it better. The big finale, so to speak, was the play. It was the opera, right? Like we did the opera. We talked about all the different acts of the opera, and it built up to this big, huge moment, right? It just felt great.
Yeah.
I think that's all I wanted to say about it. Just wanted to ruminate a little bit on that.
Well, awesome. Let's move on to our next segment. Our next segment is What Should I Be on the Lookout For?
So, David, as you know, we are currently producing and releasing a Dungeon World actual play podcast called We Hunt the Keepers. We are on the second series of that called Children of the Eight-Legged She. And I think it's pretty good. I'm enjoying it. We're getting a lot of good feedback on it. I've also been lately listening to some other Dungeon World actual plays because there actually are some pretty good ones out there now. And this is no shade to anybody in particular, but as a general matter, my general impression of the Dungeon World actual play scene was it was not that great. It was a lot of like, let's just laugh and tell jokes and not actually play kind of yuck kind of situation, right?
Yeah. And I know that has an audience. That's not for me though. So I've largely avoided it. So I am on the edge of my seat. Tell me, what are these good actual play podcasts?
Yeah. So I want to talk about two Dungeon World actual play podcasts. What I like about these two podcasts, what they share in common, is they are quite different from We Hunt the Keepers. Like, I don't think We Hunt the Keepers and these two podcasts, I don't think they are going to supplant each other, right? Because they're doing kind of different things, right? But at the same time, when you listen to these two podcasts, our paw prints are all over these suckers, right? and I know the people who produce them are fans of our actual plays, and I know they listen to our actual plays, and you can tell, right? Like there's just a lot of good play, a good understanding of mechanics, a good understanding of spotlight management. There's a lot of that stuff going on in these two, and I really like them. So the first one I want to talk about is called Points Podcast, and it is a husband and wife 1v1 podcast. Diana and Zach are their names. Zach is the GM and Diana's the player. And they don't just do Dungeon World, they do other games too, but their sort of like main story they've been doing is a Dungeon World story, as best I can tell. I haven't listened to all of it yet. And I like it. Across our podcast network, I ruthlessly enforce a sort of no banter, no bullshit approach, right? Like I don't like a lot of chatter. I don't like a lot of banter. I like to get straight to the business, Heart Points podcast definitely has a lot more chatter and a lot more banter, but it's very enjoyable to listen to. I think the fact that they're a husband and wife makes it more enjoyable. They clearly have a very good rapport with each other, And so, yeah, it's just kind of fun to listen to in that regard. And the story they're telling is quite different. I mentioned that both of these podcasts are pretty different from We Hunt the Keepers. We Hunt the Keepers overall has it's very focused on like the lore of the world, like this sort of like big campaign mystery, the mythos, the lore, super important in We Hunt the Keepers. What I love about Heart Points, their Dungeon World podcast, is it's, in a lot of ways, it's really mundane, and I love that. Like, some of the episodes I've listened to are just the character kind of like hanging out in town, like getting up to trouble in town, and I don't know. I like it. I don't think it's fun. It's just it's a fun listen. They're fun to listen to. The other one I want to talk about is called ChimaeraCast. This is put together by a group of fellows, a couple of whom are actually Slack members of the Gauntlet. It's a much more like typical Dungeon World podcast in that there's a GM, there's 3 players, and it's kind of about like moving through adventures and dangers and encounters and whatnot. And so what I like about it, though, is they are doing a really good job with the rules of the game. They very actively engage tags, for example. They talk about tags. They keep the conversation going really well around the table. They are good about spotlight management. The GM's quite good at cutting away at appropriate moments and, letting a die roll happen and then cutting away. It's the thing I do, right? Letting a die roll happen and then cutting away. So that's all great. They have a really good rapport, and also the production values are really high. That's true of Hardpoints as well. Very, very good production value. The audio quality is great. The edit is really good. Yeah, so I'm enjoying these two. I have kind of just started to dig into them a little bit. I'm a few episodes in on both of them. But yeah, I'm into it.
That's cool. I am going to have to listen to these, especially Hardpoints, just because the idea of 1-and-1 play is just, I don't know, it's really interesting to me. And I know Dungeon World isn't built specifically to do it, so I always like to see how people do it.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about this before, but I think the reason why the 1v1 works for them, the way they're running it, is because it is such a sort of like, it does feel like such a like kind of slice of life sort of adventure,
Yeah.
with this character. And I think that works really well. The ChimaeraCast, they're doing, theirs definitely so far at least has a much more like sort of traditional feel to it, but quite good. And importantly, the chemistry is really good in all cases with these two podcasts. Like there's just a really good, solid chemistry. The ChimaeraCast, they sometimes get into like this sort of funny yuck stuff more than we do at least. But it's never like too much. It's always like, oh, these are just some dudes having a good time.
Sweet.
Yeah, I recommend them. We'll have links in the show notes.
All right. I will check them out probably right after this. Let's move on to our next segment. Our next segment is What Here Is Not What It Appears to Be. So, as Jason warned, we were going to be talking about me and how I play some characters. Specifically, we had a question from Garrett that he wanted answered about the character Logan Stormbreaker, who is featured in We Hunt the Keepers in a number of episodes. And specifically, he was wondering about like how I ride the line between power gaming and still like playing it loose, I guess.
He said playing to lose. I'll read his exact quote here.
Yeah.
He just misspelled lose. He says, I'm still fascinated about the way, I should mention, I asked folks in our Slack, like, hey, do you guys have any like questions for David and I, some topics we can cover? And a lot of good questions, a lot of good topics came through, but this one really stuck out to me. He says, I'm still fascinated about the way David plays Logan in We Hunt the Keepers. I cannot really describe it. For me, it's a perfect blend of power gaming and playing to lose. He plays like a supportive NPC towards the other PCs, and at the same time has this 100% immersive, what would my character actually do in this situation kind of approach. I would like to hear him talking more about how he has found this playstyle for him and how he enjoys it. Let me rephrase what I think Garrett's getting at here a little bit, because this is something I have also observed. You are definitely more of I don't know if power gaming is how I would put it, but you definitely like play to survive, right? Like there's like when the other characters are doing stuff, you are always ready there to do the thing to help them, right? And to make sure the team wins. But when faced with moral dilemmas or ethical dilemmas, or when faced with something that challenges your character's thoughts and beliefs, you then like kind of switch into a mode where you're more where you're playing a little bit more dangerously with your character, right? As we will see in the next We Hunt the Keepers series, the Path of Dim Carcosa, right? So I think that's what Garrett's getting at there. Like you do ride this line between like power gaming and winning, so to speak, but also at the same time, like being really, really honest about what your character would actually do in a situation.
Yeah. So I think for me, it harkens back to a discussion we had a few episodes back, where we were talking about this idea of, should your players be looking for their own trouble, or is that the GM's job? And from my perspective, I don't want to necessarily like power game, but I am there to be my character. And what my character means is that that the character is interested in self-survival. Like, they're going to do things that they would do because they're a competent adventurer. So that means that, like, I'm not trying to bring like meta knowledge or anything in to like make my character more successful, but my character is a competent adventurer, so they would know things that would make them be doing these tactically sound things in the moment to help everyone else. And I think the other part of that is paying attention to flags, which makes me maybe appear like a supportive NPC, in the fact that, like, I see what other people like want to do from their flags, and I want to support them because, hey, I get an XP or whatever. But really, like, we want to hit flags like no matter what, just because like that's how they want their character to be addressed. So always trying to hit like a bunch of flags. It's fun to hit flags. It leads to good narrative. But then you have to switch gears and realize you are there to tell a story with everyone else at the table. It is not just the GM's job to make this excellent story happen. It is everyone's responsibility. And that also ties into why you want to hit more flags. It's not just a power gaming thing. It's to tell a good story. And when your character gets confronted with something that would be interesting to them or would make them think about doing something reckless, as we will see in upcoming episodes of We Hunt the Keepers, then that's a very honest response for your character to do it. It's not, it's not looking for their own trouble. Trouble has found you, and unfortunately, it's your kryptonite.
Yeah, I'm really glad we're having this discussion. Sort of big picture, we talk a lot about GMing stuff, right? I consider myself to be a pretty good GM. I've done it a lot, and so I've got a tool set, right? We don't often talk about like being a good player, and I think as good as a GM as I may be, I think you're just as good a player, right? And I think that doesn't get said enough, right? I don't think we emphasize enough in role-playing game culture the role of the player, Rach and Rich did a really terrific episode of Plus One Forward, one of our other podcasts. They did a really terrific episode about the player's agenda and principles, right? And it was a totally fresh take on sort of the player's responsibility at the table. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at here, right? Is as a player, you also have a responsibility for managing the narrative, right? You have a responsibility for managing the fun to some degree. Going back to what we were talking about in the first segment, you picked up on very adeptly, I believe, you picked up on what would the movie version of this be like right now. In the movie version, it would be weird for Shep to be a long lost brother of this like core, plot NPC or whatever, right? Like it would be weird for Shep to be involved in these two characters like romance or whatever, right? So instead in the movie, Shep would be the comic relief. Shep would be the backup character. He'd be the B plot, right? And I think it takes skillful play to look at the full scope of the story and figure out where you fit, right?
Yeah, I mean, and I don't know, there's a certain satisfaction to just being part of a good story. It doesn't matter which one you are, if you're the A plot or the B plot or whatever, you're like the story is the joy for me. So getting to see the other players doing their thing and pushing them to do their thing is satisfaction for me. And that's kind of the story gaming side. If I was going to say, like, I have two minds. I have this older side, this power gamey, more traditional style.
The more trad, yeah.
And then I have a story gaming side. And I think that in the spirit of Dungeon World being a PBTA game that is in the genre of Dungeons and Dragons, it is good for the players to be a little bit more interested in being competent about how they're handling the world.
I think that's right. This goes to what Garrett was saying, like this idea of, well, what I think Garrett was really getting at in his question was, and you've just kind of pinged on it, in most PBTA games, there is a sort of culture of embracing failure. We've talked about that before, right? This culture of embracing adversity, not embracing failure necessarily, but embracing adversity, right? And that can be at odds with the D&D-esque fantasy story, right? And so I think the way you play it is perfectly legit, right? Like, not every character has to be of, like a sort of font of emotional turmoil and compromised, beliefs, right? like some characters can be just there to do the job.
Right. And that's the thing with Logan Stormbreaker, is he is very much there to do the job, but he has his own motivations. He wants the keys. He has some really sad history and things that we actually get to explore a bit in all this. And I think the latest episode of We Hunt the Keepers actually dives into that at the tree of Brandon Barkbender. And that whole scene was developed to hit a flag of another character.
Yeah, flags are important here, right? I'm really glad you brought up the flags thing, because I think what doesn't come through well on our actual plays is how much you guys are hitting flags, right? We don't talk about them super explicitly on the recording, at least, or I guess, or to the extent that we do talk about it, I think Fraser must edit it away because it almost never comes up on the recording. But it's happening, right? Like, the flags are happening. And I think that's one of the reasons why I love flags so much, is because they're invitations to behave in a certain way that don't necessarily interfere with the adventure, right? And I think that's really important. Like, when you're playing a game like Dungeon World that is so adventure focused, it's so mission focused, where you might be in a literal dungeon, right? You need a social mechanic that is pretty lightweight and pretty adaptable to lots of different situations. And flags happen to work really well for just like little downtime moments. And I find they never really like interfere with the bigger story too much, right?
Yeah. So I think that's really all that I have to say about my philosophy on how I play characters, specifically characters in Dungeon World, because, other games, they do not have that same level of, you need to be competent and ride the line on power gaming, but still like being honest about your character. Other games that are powered by the apocalypse, I would much more focus on just being true to my character, because that's
right.
The genre they are in.
That's the thing. Genre is so important there, right? Like I think the other thing we've played recently in recent months that wasn't DW was Crossroads Carnival, right? And as far as PBTA games go, and yeah, for sure, like, you were definitely not playing to win, right? Like, you were playing a heartsick muscle woman, right?
Right.
Who just kind of, she's just a very sad character, actually, in a lot of ways. But yeah, so I think your point about the genre is very important, right? So I think the best response to Garrett is, honestly, like, you're playing D&D the most, while also still giving it that human dimension, right? And I think that's what makes him so compelling. Yeah,
but yeah, I will say, like, we saw a lot of good characterization. A lot of that was compelled by Garrett's character, Archon Megalodon.
Right, yeah. Who does not play to win. He plays for all of you to lose.
Yeah. And that might be another piece of it too. If you don't have other characters that are being a little bit reckless, then like maybe you be the character that's a little bit reckless and realize that you need that if your GM's not just like pounding on you.
Absolutely.
Let's move on to our next segment. Our next segment is What Here is Useful or Valuable to Me?
All right, David. Our contest that we have been running, or that ended a month ago, the contest is resolved. We have chosen the winner and runner-up for our, what do we call it? Keepers of the Gauntlet contest, right? Yeah. So, a recap on what the contest was really quickly. We have this great big list of names, these keeper titles that we give to our Patreon supporters. They're very cool, very evocative, very cryptic in some cases. And we challenge listeners to write magic items, custom moves, and monsters that were inspired by these Keepers of the Gauntlet titles. It was very good. The quality of the entries was quite high. That's been the case for the last couple of contests, actually, with these really, really high quality entries. It does not make our job easy.
No, it doesn't.
It does not. That makes it really hard. That's why it's taken us so long, listeners, to finally get this to you. We had about just over 50 entries, I think. And given the quality of these entries, I think 50 is pretty good. One thing that happened in this contest, which I was super intrigued by, we had several participants submit multiple entries, right? Which is totally within the rules. That's totally cool. But a couple of people, they actually linked up their entries in terms of their fiction, right? So one entry like made subtle reference to another one of their entries, right?
Right.
Like they were creating like a little, world, in their entries. So I really loved that. I thought that was a great like development in this contest.
Yeah, that was really cool. Like one was like this demon, it has like a secret name and no one knew his secret name. And then in the other, it was like the 10 keys to or the keys to hell or something like that. And then the demon, like at some point had the keys to hell and you're just like, oh geez, I read that name before. So that was kind of funny.
Yeah, there were a few instances like that where like they just like where they were kind of connected to each other. And yeah, I love that. I thought that was great. In any case, super high quality entries, very, very great. Made our job quite difficult. In the end, we worked with our producer, Paul, to whittle it down, and we had some discussion and we decided on the following. So we have one runner-up, and then we have two winning entries. We couldn't decide between these top two choices.
We had a tie.
Yeah, because based off the criteria that we set, our judging criteria, these two were tied, essentially. And so we just named them both the winner, and that was that. I thought we'd start with the runner-up, though. Do you want to read it?
Our runner-up is The Collected Motions of Melbridon Hing. I'm trying to say that name right.
I don't know. I think it's Melbridon Hinge or Hinge? I'm not sure.
However you say that name. But it was based on The Keeper of the Book of False Rituals.
Yes, and we should mention, it was written by Logan Howard.
Yes. So the text goes as follows. This tiny book is nothing more than a few folded pages bound with string. It is not unique, and a variety of different editions can be found being peddled by suspicious types on the streets of larger cities. It is filled with 3-word titles of spells and simple illustrations of robed figures holding odd poses and gesturing. The images are clearly meant to be sequences of movement that, when strung together, produce magical effects. Unfortunately, the poor layout makes it difficult to tell which pose follows another or which spell they belong to. The whole thing is so poorly designed that the more carefully you think about what it's telling you to do, the worse the results will be. And here's the move. When you attempt to perform one of the spells in the collected motions of Melbridon Hinge, say the 3-word title of the spell and what you hope it will do. Perform several mystical-looking motions, and then roll plus int. On a 6-, you actually get results that are pretty close to what you wanted. The GM will tell you what went wrong and how it turned out to accomplish your goal. On a 7 to 9, whatever you did was wrong because you got completely different results. Fortunately, it was useful in a very different way. The GM will tell you how. And on a 10+, oh no, you thought about it too hard. Mark XP. The GM will tell you how the spell went horribly wrong.
Yeah, I like this a lot. It's really good. It's super fun, right? It's really fun. There's a performative aspect to it, which I think is pretty cool. You have to like do hand motions, and you also have to come up with the 3-word name of the spell. And it's got a cool like little reverse move situation. Those don't often work really well, but in this case, the reverse outcomes where the 10+ is the worst result and the 6- is the best result. In this case, it works out really well because the fiction supporting it is quite strong. Like there's a really like nice fictional connection to that sort of like reversed outcomes situation. And in that case, and in that way, it was a very, very strong entry, in addition to just being quite entertaining.
Right. I mean, it's a book of false rituals. Like, it shouldn't work, but when you get the 6-, apparently it works.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's also got this like, it's got this like little kind of weird dig at like people who are like book smart versus people who are just like hapless, right?
Right.
Like the hapless person just stumbles into success, right? But the really like logical, reasonable, book smart person like just can't make it work, right? It's a disaster. So
no, I tell you what, if Logan Stormbreaker found these, he would be trying to get some dumb fighter to, hey, try out these gestures for me. Let him try it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. Anyway, so congratulations on being a runner-up, Logan Howard, not Logan Stormbreaker. Congratulations on being a runner-up. Very, very fun, enjoyable move.
So that gets us to our 2 winners.
Yes. Now, we should mention, listeners, that the 2 winners were actually entries that we read on earlier episodes of the show. So you have heard these before if you follow the podcast closely, but we're going to read them again. The first entry, I'll read the first one, is the Keeper of the Cloak of Logan Stormbreaker. How many times have we said Logan Stormbreaker this episode, David?
It's a theme. Let's say it a few more times.
About 100. Yeah, we said the word Logan 100 times this episode. The Keeper of the Cloak of Logan Stormbreaker by Danny Hood. Congratulations, Danny. I should mention that we did not choose this because it's named after a character in our actual play. That was not a consideration at all. This was actually just a really, really good entry. Also, and I don't think Danny was doing a teacher's pet thing either, because I'm pretty sure he submitted this before we Hunt the Keepers even started. So
yeah, I'm pretty sure that's true.
Yeah, so he didn't know. In fact, he inadvertently did kind of a dangerous thing, right? Because he submitted something that is connected to something that you and I have like such a strong
we're very
association with
in
something,
that, yeah.
Right? Yeah. But let's read it. Logan was part of a small group of wizards that referred to themselves as storm mages. He loved chasing storms with his groundhog familiar and divining the future based on lightning strikes. His most favorite possession was his cloak. When you don the cloak of Logan Stormbreaker, a groundhog will appear soon after and join you. When you decide to influence the weather, explain how the cloak allows that and roll plus wisdom. On a 10+, you choose a weather type from the table below. Within a few minutes, the weather type will center on you for 1 mile radius for up to 24 hours. When the weather effects have ended, your groundhog will collapse near death. You must nurse him back to health before you can use the cloak again. If your groundhog dies, the magic in the cloak will disappear. On a 7-9, you roll 1d8 2 times and choose between the 2 weather types from the table below. Within a few hours, the weather type will center on you for a half-mile radius for up to 12 hours. Your groundhog is weakened, but will recover if you keep him safe. On a 6-, the GM determines which weather type centers on you for a 5-foot radius and for how long. Your groundhog acts tired and wants a nap. And then there's a number of weather options: lightning storm, blinding blizzard, high winds, scorching heat, thick fog, heavy rain, pelting hail, and freezing cold. I love this so much.
It's so good. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I loved it. I loved it when we read it before, and I still love it. Obviously, we made it a winner. It's just great. Yeah, it was an early entry. It stuck with me. It's just fun. The groundhog thing is really cute, and I'm just imagining all this in play, and I just think it looks really good.
Yeah, this is just a great magic item. Like, the fact that it was inspired by our our meager titer, Keeper of the Cloak of Logan Stormbreaker, is shows the creativity that Danny Hood put into this.
Absolutely, absolutely. The next winning entry, because we said there were two, is also by Danny Hood. Congratulations, Danny Hood.
I know.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, congratulations. I mean, these were both really good. I mean, there's, at the end of the day, we couldn't get past these two. These are the two that we loved. It is Keeper of the Orphan's Kiss. David, you want to read it?
When you stumble upon the skeletal remains of a child, you find a teddy bear, old and worn but still in good shape, clutched in the child's arms. When you touch the bear, roll plus charisma. On a 6-, the spirit of the child takes residence in your body. You will sometimes struggle with the child as it attempts to take control of you. When you are presented with a scene or situation that the GM feels a child would want to investigate, and you accept, then take XP. On a 7-9, the spirit of the child takes residence in your backpack. You begin to notice that your things are missing at inopportune times. The child has no malice, but it likes to go through your stuff and play with it, and sometimes things don't get put back. The GM will tell you what and when. And then on a 10+, the spirit of the child begins following you around. The child likes to ask a lot of questions. A stern "don't make me get up," or "I'm counting to 3," will usually quiet it down. And then finally, when you appear at the Black Gate, you see a green field full of kids, frolicking and playing games. Death is striding toward you with her arms open wide. You feel something brush past your leg, and a small, translucent child runs to Death and jumps in her arms and kisses her on the cheek. Death thanks you and gives you a reprieve. Until next time.
Love it. Love it so much. From top to bottom, every moment of this magic item is so good. So much great fiction. So really cool, like useful effects. I like the fact that the Black Gate effect they might not even know about until they go to the Black Gate, right? And just imagine like springing that on them, right? Like that's a great moment.
Yeah, like this is more than a magic item. This is like an NPC and like a darling that you're waiting to give to Death. Like, can you imagine like if like the players got like really invested in this ghost child and then like they got sent to the Black Gate and it goes running into Death's arms? Oh my god.
Right, yeah, I know. Like it's good. Yeah, like it's really good. Like I'm just imagining all this stuff happening out in play. Same thing with the Groundhog Stormcloak thing. Like I'm just seeing how, like, to me, I can just see how it's going to go at the table, right? Like, it's vivid, it's evocative. There's tons of story potential. What's the deal with this little kid, this little ghost kid? I'm imagining, yeah, like you said, like the party bonding with a little ghost kid, like, all that stuff happening. And then, yeah, the real, the killer moment at the end, the real clincher at the little Black Gate moment. So good.
When you tell them, roll for Black Gate, you know what? Actually, just hold your dice.
Yes. Oh God, yes, I know. Anyway, I love this one. It was an early favorite of mine. Like when this one came across, I was like, oh shit, this is so good. And the bar was set high by Danny, I fear, for everybody else. But that said, everybody should feel super proud of their contributions. I'm telling you, it was amazing. Like the quality level was so freaking high.
Like Codex publishable quality.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It was so great. Actually, speaking of which, I'm thinking that it's probably about time to start planning for the next Discern Realities annual issue of Codex, right? And I think we should include a bunch of stuff from this contest, as well as the Shrine contest we did, which was also very, very good. These two contests, I mean, listeners, you guys are fucking killing it. I mean, the quality level is super high. And I hope that, I mean, yes, we had a runner-up. Yes, we had a winner. But really what I hope participants take away from our contests, it's not like winning $25, right? Like that can't be the most important thing here, right? It's more of like feeling inspired to do something, right? Great story. If you'll give me a minute. One of our community members, Michael Barford, his first RPG writings were entries in these contests, right? Some of the early contests we did. I think on the compendium class contest, I think he was the winner, if I'm not mistaken. Right?
Yeah, he sure was.
Yeah. And, that kind of, he told me, he's like, you know what? Like this has really like lit a fire under me. Like I really want to write, role-playing game stuff. I feel like I can do this. And so he participated in our Gauntlet Con writing contest. He won that. And then he's got a thing coming up in Codex Storm, which is still a little ways out. But I just, to me, like that was like the best possible result for these contests for me. I don't know about you, but that's like what I wanted out of this. I wanted people to be excited about creating stuff.
I'm in this for purely selfish motivations. I just want to see more cool Dungeon World content
I
get
know.
created.
I know, the same way too. Yeah, I like to have stuff to use in my game too. But ultimately though, yeah, like congratulations, Logan. Congratulations, Danny. We have $25 for each of you, and then Danny, we're going to invite you to come host an episode of the show with David and I. And everybody else, just congratulations for participating. You all did fabulously.
Let's move on to our next segment.
Hi listeners, I want to tell you about the newest issue of Codex, Codex Love 2. It's a sequel to the original Codex Love, and it has a lot of really fantastic features, including The Final Girl, a game of love, a hack of the classic horror movie game The Final Girl, but for reality dating shows like The Bachelor and Flavor of Love. And Then They Met, an original 2-player story game about a couple destined to fall in love, but that takes place entirely in the weeks and days leading up to the first time they lay eyes on each other. Willow Bluff, a queer-themed town for the classic game Dogs in the Vineyard. The newest Gauntlet daddy, Sir Barrick, and his lovely companion, Gwyn. 3 dozen men who need to be rescued. 7 original illustrations. And a custom layout by Ollie Jeffrey, whose work was recently seen in the smash hit Legacy 2E. To get Codex Love 2, just make a $4 or higher pledge on the Gauntlet Patreon by April 30th. That's at patreon.com/gauntlet. And don't forget, Codex back issues are now available on Drive-Thru RPG. Thanks.
Our next segment is What is About to Happen. Listeners, last time we saw the ongoing adventure of St. Evelyn the White as she confronted this creature named Zagan, who she believed was a demon, but was mistaken and found out that he was in fact some sort of a Feyan creature of the Fey realm. And this creature approached her and was trying to force her out of the Beaten Barley Inn where she was staying. And in his attempt, he moved underneath a chandelier made of iron, which St. Evelyn did a very acrobatic move towards with a small wood-cutting axe, cut the post that was holding it up, and dropped the iron directly on top of Zagan. The iron began to burn his flesh. He screamed out, and Marlene, the owner of the inn, came stumbling back into the room, alarmed by the sound. St. Evelyn, what do you do?
Is Zagan trapped right now?
Zagan appears to be trapped pretty handily. He screams for a moment, and then he passes out as if from the pain. And there's still a hissing and sizzling and smell of pig cooking smell, bacon cooking smell in the room. Oh my God, what have you done?
What do you mean, what have I done? I have subdued this wicked creature that was tormenting you.
What's that smell? And she's about to lean over the counter and look. She can't quite see from her angle what's going on with
the creature appears to be sensitive to iron.
And then she looks over the side and sees the chandelier from her ceiling is now on top of his back, pinning his legs and arms to the ground and really his back in general. And any point of contact where that iron is slowly just melting his flesh away.
What does she look like? Is she distraught? Does she care about the creature? I fear that maybe I'm misreading the situation or something with her.
I think she's just kind of horrified. She was scared, but, she didn't expect this. She's very pale-faced and looking in disgust as the flesh is, bubbling out of any point of contact.
I go to her and I say, all right, madam, you were going to have to explain to me what is going on here. Why was this creature in your inn?
I don't know. I thought he was a bard. We have to do something. We can't just leave him like this. What if someone comes in? She, starts bustling towards the door.
Yes, you're right. Perhaps we can take him out back. We can secure him, bind him, cut off his head, bury him. I'm not sure. Let me think. Where have I heard about such creatures before? The thing that I fear, madam, is that there is a special way to kill him, a special procedure. Demons and such are not... You often can't just lop their heads off. There's more to it than that, right? There's more ceremony. There's more process. There's more... I think I'm trying to spout lore here.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Go ahead and roll.
I got a 5.
So, where are you standing right now? Were you by the door where she is?
No, I think I stayed pretty close to his body, actually.
But you were looking at her as she was walking towards the door?
Yes, I was talking to her for sure. But I was like, I basically, I kind of went up to her and I tried to say, hey, what was going on? And she kind of pushed past me to go to the door. And that's when I think I walked back over to him and I was like, we got to figure out what to do about him. I think I was kind of maybe looking at her, looking at him, but I was near him.
Okay. So you are talking with her and she's barring the door because she's can't let anyone in. She's putting out a closed sign, however she indicates that. How does she indicate that the shop is closed?
I think she just locks the door. She just bars the door. And the people just wander up and push the door and it's not open. They know it's closed.
Yeah. And there is a moment where you're looking at her and then you realize as she turns back and looks at you and then looks down and her eyes get real wide, you realize you don't hear that hissing noise anymore. And you look down and the creature, whatever it was, is gone.
I kneel down. I carefully look around the chandelier. I rub my fingertips on the wood to see if there's any kind of residue or remainder. Just trying to get a sense of maybe what happened here.
Yeah, all of that bubbled flesh that was cooking and smoking is still stuck to where it was touching the iron. And if you want to roll for discern realities, you may do so.
I got an 8.
All right, so you're going to get one question.
I'm inclined to ask what happened here recently, but I kind of know what happened here recently. So I think what I'm going to ask instead is, what should I be on the lookout for?
You hear floorboards creaking around the room, as if something is still moving about. And just when you think that you're going to be able to figure out exactly where the floorboards creaking are come from, there comes a on the door.
I'm sure Marlene is reacting very badly right now.
She's freaking out. She's just got her back to the door and she's looking left and looking right and she hears that knocking and she gives a little jump and a startled scream, and then from outside the door you hear, "Hey, why is the inn closed? Open up, Marlene."
I look at her and I say, "Madam, I do apologize, but I fear I have to take a drastic measure to figure out where this creature went, to draw them to me." And I begin to take off my clothes.
And I think we're going to end it there.
It's not going to be... I've got a plan. It's not totally...
That just leaves one final question. Who's really in control here?
Discern Realities is a production of The Gauntlet. You can get in touch with The Gauntlet generally, and me specifically, by going to Twitter and tweeting at me at GauntletRPG. We are on G+. Just go to the community section of G+, and search for The Gauntlet. You will find us there. We have a website, gauntlet-rpg.com. And we are on Patreon at patreon.com/gauntlet.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, David.
Thanks, listeners. That's our show.
Bow, wow, wow.
We don't do that anymore. It comes before.
Bow, wow, yeah.